Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for your continued support. And to those of you that joined because of my impossibly well-performing Magus preview linked above, welcome, and I hope you're here to stay. I have plenty more Impossible Magic previews to show you, and a lot more fun content that I like to share. So hang around and like and comment on the videos that you enjoy and subscribe if you want to see the future ones. Today's video is a preview on impossible spells from the Impossible Magic book, and I am so excited by these spells. This channel has a lot of spell analysis in general, so I figured spells are a natural place for me to start, but the actual list of normal spells that you're going to be using from this book is huge. There are 50 pages worth of spells for me to go through, and I'm still in the process of making that video, but there's only 5 impossible spells in the game, and they're all cool and cinematic and fun, and I figured there'd be a fantastic place to start drumming up the hype for this book. So let's get into it. Let us talk about the basics of impossible spells first. The things that apply to every single spell that has the impossible trait, both in terms of flavor and in terms of mechanics. First up, flavor. The idea here is that you are supposed to be casting utterly reality warping spells akin to D&D 5e's Wish or Divine Intervention effects, but notably only a small portion of them. So Wish, for example, in D&D 5e has effectively 3 separate buckets of effects. The first is where you just replicate a lower rank spell. That is covered by the Manifestation spell in Pathfinder 2nd edition, and that also covers the 5.5e interpretation of Divine Intervention, because it is also just a spell replication effect, and in Pathfinder, all traditions have Manifestation. And likewise, I'm not talking about the completely open-ended wish for literally whatever you want, and maybe the GM might monkey's paw you portion of Wish, because that is covered by the Wish ritual in Pathfinder, and I will talk about rituals later in this video. I'm talking about the middle portion of that. I'm talking about how when you read the Wish spell in D&D 5e, there are a few listed use cases that are not up for GM interpretation. You use them, you take the stress of casting Wish like that, but you get what might be a near instant win for the combat that you use them for. Likewise, Divine Intervention, when you look at how it was implemented in Baldur's Gate 3, there are a few use cases like fully healing up and resting up your whole party that are predefined for you, but once you have used it, it's gone. It's never coming back for this campaign. That is the design space these spells are all trying to fill. And at the end of this video, you'll realize why I'm talking so much about their design space, because the why of the spell is actually more important than the what. And the flavor behind them has some really fun nods to how gamers feel about once per campaign effects, how they like to hoard them, how they might feel tempted to use them at every turn of the combat just because of how epic they are. So the flavor has a whole bunch of stuff about how these spells are almost like semi-sentient, where they almost exert their will over the players, trying to convince them to use them as soon as possible, and the longer the player hoards them, the more anxiety their character feels over it. And if you happen to be holding on to an impossible spell, I really do hope you roleplay into that, because that seems like a lot of fun flavor. Now, let's talk about the common mechanics of all of these spells. The first and most important one is that only one impossible trait spell can be used by a character in their soul's life cycle. Not in their body's life cycle, not in this current incarnation. That soul, once it has cast one spell with the impossible trait, it can never cast any other spell with the impossible trait ever again, including the one they just cast. It leaves their mind, it leaves their body, it leaves their soul. Resurrection, reincarnation, none of that matters. Once you have cast the spell until you are dissolved into quintessence and cycled back into a new soul, it's not coming back. And at that point, that's not you. That's just an entirely different character. Paizo really wanted to make it clear that these are not just once per campaign effects, these are once per soul cycle effects, and these are supposed to be rare. Only a handful of them have probably ever been cast in Golarion's history, with the 5 spells each listing an event in Golarion where they were cast before. And when you do cast them, they will permanently scar you with a debuff named Lethologic Mark. And that will start 1 hour after casting the spell. So you're not going to have the issue where you cast the spell and instantly become useless in that combat, but an hour later, you will start feeling the ill effects. And again, the debuff applies to the soul, not the living being. Dying and being resurrected does not remove the mark that the spell has left on you, though every single mark does come with a unique side quest to clear it. And each mark is unique, so the mark is uniquely associated with the spell in question. The debuff you get is thematically relevant to that spell, and then there is a thematically relevant quest to clear that debuff. Simply having the impossible trait makes your spell harder to counteract. All counteract effects, regardless of rank, regardless of the user's level, will have 1 degree worse on their outcome when targeting an impossible spell. And once you have cast one, on future rounds, once per round, you can use a single action to fuel the spell. This makes you doomed 1 if you were not already doomed, and increases your doomed condition if you were already doomed, presumably due to having fueled your spell. And what it does is create a persisting effect in the area that you cast the spell. And these effects tend to be pretty powerful. They also cannot be spell-shaped, which I think is not even so much a balance concern as it is a tracking concern. I think they just didn't want you to use Widen Spell or Reach Spell on something that already has an insane range or burst, as you will see. And most importantly of all, they're all overtuned to a ridiculous degree compared to other comparable spells at their rank. They're designed to be stronger, to create larger, more explosive, more upfront effects with better sustained effects, and they last longer in a lot of cases than equal rank spells. There is actually one that lasts for 24 whole hours. And finally, every single one of them has the unique tag, and every single one of them requires a component to cast, and the component often has a hefty gold cost, though not always, but it always is a unique component, one you're not going to find in the course of normal play. You will only find this if the GM has enabled you to find it. Impossible spells are not a player-facing option. They're a GM-facing option for you to effectively create a set piece around, and I will get into that at the end of this video. But first, let's look at some of these impossible spells. Let's start by talking about a first rank impossible spell. Yes, first rank. Impossible spells are available at all ranks of play, and they will disproportionately outperform anything else at that rank. So this is Pyroclastic Truth. This is a 3-action spell that has a range of 500 feet and 100-foot burst with a 1-minute non-sustained duration. When you create the effect, every single creature, object, or structure in the area takes 2d12 fire damage. 2d12 is above par for a first rank spell. Compare it to Thunderstrike, which does single target 1d12 plus 1d4 damage. This does multi-target 2d12 damage in an area so incredibly large that you're gonna hit everyone on the battlefield. The cost of this spell is also probably the least crazy of the costs I've seen on all the impossible spells, which should go to show you how GM fiat they really are, because you need a flask of lava harvested from an active volcano. How on earth is a first level character going to get their hands on that? The only possible way to do so is GM fiat. The GM will have set up a quest for you to somehow harvest this volcano, and then you will have access to this incredible spell that will dominate one combat when used. So when you create the blast, you do outsized amounts of damage. And if you look at the heightening, it's 2d12 per rank as well. And that means you're going to outdamage every single spell you could possibly cast at every single level by a pretty substantial margin. 2d12 scaling is nothing to scoff at. This AoE is going to outperform most single target damage spells by like a factor of 20 to 50% at any given rank. And each time you fuel Pyroclastic Truth, you do auto persistent damage, which is a 1d12 heightening by 1d12. Fantastic damage, single target, multi-target, whatever you want, over a crazy area. And in fact, the area is so big that if you get setup time in an open field encounter, you can use this from so far away that you will have won the combat by the time the enemies even get close to you. And here is the lethalogic mark of Pyroclastic Truth. Once you have used the spell and an hour has passed, anytime you take fire damage, you become frightened 1. Additionally, if you are reduced to 0 HP by a fire effect, you instantly die. This does not have the death trait, you are turned to ash, your soul is cast into the plane of fire, and has to burn for eternity there, which I am interpreting to mean that nothing short of a wish ritual is bringing you back. And the only way to heal the mark once it's on you is to perform an atone ritual on both the plane of fire and the plane of water. Again, healing the mark impossible without GM fiat. And this sort of serves as the baseline for how crazy impossible spells are, because this is just a good spell. If you get to cast it in a multi-target encounter, you're almost instantly going to win, and even against a single target, unless they critically succeed, it's going to do some crazy heavy lifting. And yet, this spell isn't as explosive or combat domineering as some of the others I will be showing you. Now, let's flip all the way to the other extreme. We checked out a first rank spell, and while it was really powerful, all it really did was damage. A fireball that beats all other fireballs is still just a fireball. But this 10th rank impossible spell, Veil of Broken Reality, is something else entirely. It has a level of both power and narrative warping that is unmatched even among 10th rank spells. And you could see it right off the bat from reading the template of the spell. It has a range of 5 feet, adjacent to you basically, but it creates a 100-mile burst area. Now, I will say, I am assuming that this 100-mile burst ignores line of effect rules, simply because this spell's main use case gets much worse without ignoring those rules, and you'll see why as we read through this spell. It has a duration of 24 hours. It is designed to apply a permanent debuff to everyone present when you cast a spell within 100 miles of you. And its cost is a mile-long length of Dream Spider Silk infused with the essence of the Maelstrom. Quite frankly, I don't know what that even means, but again, very GM fiat. Even for 20th level characters, how on earth are you going to reliably get your hands on this? So what does the spell do for all this bombastic of a template? Well, everyone in the area except 10 creatures you chose, which can include your party, familiar, animal companions, etc., must make a will saving throw. If you're level 16 or lower, you automatically critically fail. Everyone else has one of the 4 effects. Let's look at success, failure, and critical failure first. On a success, you're slowed 1 and you know who cast the spell. The relevance of that we'll see in a second. On a failure, you're slowed 1 and can't use reactions, and you don't know who cast the spell, which is part of why I am assuming that this is meant to ignore line of effect rules, because this doesn't have the subtle trait, and it has a 100-mile burst. So clearly this whole knowing who cast the spell thing is meant to be because you can cast this from anywhere and have it take effect on people who can't even see you or perceive you or even be aware of you. On a critical failure, you're effectively just gone. Remember, these effects last for 24 hours, so on a success or failure, you're slowed 1 for 24 hours. On a critical failure, you can't do anything for 24 hours. Now let's talk about the critical success effect. Nothing happens to you, you instantly learn who cast the spell, you learn the effect of the spell, and you learn of the current location of the spellcaster. So from this, you can see that this spell is designed for you to set yourself up to assail a dungeon or a fortress or something of the sort against impossible odds. You debuff everyone in the area that is not party or party. Any civilians in the area are just unable to do anything for 24 straight hours. And then over those 24 hours, you're supposed to attack and dismantle whatever operation you just debuffed. The critical success effect is sort of the counterbalance to the spell almost. Because it specifically calls out that people learn your current location, the assumption here is that they will now converge on your location, and you might have a mathematically unwinnable encounter on your hands. And that is where fueling Veil of Broken Reality comes in, because it lets you cast Freeze Time for 1 action, not 3, just 1, without expending a spell slot. So you use one action, you get 9 free actions, and then when those 9 actions end, you have your remaining 2 actions for your turn to start doing something with. So effectively, so long as you're willing to get doomed, you have 2 to 3 uses of strictly better freeze time. It's freeze time that gives you 11 actions rather than 9. And this is on top of the fact that a whole bunch of your enemies are slowed. So this is very much meant for a campaign-ending set piece. You're supposed to take on impossible odds and come out ahead by using the spell. And then when the spell ends, all events that happened in this 100-mile burst are wiped from everyone's memories, including yourself and anyone else you excluded from the spell's effects, and all physical records of these are retroactively erased. Anyone trying to learn about this simply can't, and the only way to learn about this is via another impossible spell. This is an exceptionally powerful spell. I mentioned earlier that some of the other impossible spells will win the combat they're cast in. This one will win the adventuring day it was cast on, single-handedly, unless you get exceptionally unlucky or have no plan for the people who critically succeeded. It is such a powerful spell. Slowing everyone in the area is already an effect worthy of something better than a 10th rank spell, and then it contains 2 to 3 castings of a strictly better freeze time within it. And of course, it has a lethologic mark. And it is actually a bit of a terrifying lethologic mark. It makes people just forget you. Anyone new you meet forgets you exist after 1 hour. No check attached. Anyone who already knew you must make a DC 5 flat check each morning, and on a failure, they forget you until the next morning. 3 failures in a row, and they forget you permanently. This basically prevents your character from ever being able to function in a normal way again. And the only way to fix this is to go into the dimension of time, travel it, and speak 5 of your true names. But of course, you may not have a party while doing this because it's possible for your party to permanently forget you. This is a fantastic spell, and it sets up so many possible plots, both the setup of finding all of the components for the spell, then actually using the spell on what is otherwise unwinnable of an adventuring day, and then fixing the effects of the spell on the person who has the mark now, whoever cast the spell in the first place. And it's hilarious because once you get to the point of fixing the lethologic mark, you will have forgotten why you even used this spell, because there's no save attached to that. You just forgot everything that happened in the dungeon you cleared. No one, not even your own party, is going to remember what you cast the spell for, and then you'll be at the risk of being completely forgotten too. Kind of poetic, really cinematic. This one spell is worthy of a whole campaign. Having talked about both extremes, I now wanted to talk about what might be the impossible spell with the most cinema and aura, Under Sunless Skies. This is a 9th rank spell, and you'll notice this cost has an actual gold value attached to it because it is something you can just retrieve from the Darklands, right? It's obsidian and sunstone. These are things you can search for, but finding 25,000 gold pieces of them, it's gonna need a whole quest. The area is a 1 mile burst centered on you, and the duration is just 1 minute. So it's not meant to be a semi-permanent effect like Veil of Broken Reality. But effectively, the entire area comes under the effect of a 9th rank darkness. You and anyone you consider your ally in the area has greater dark vision for the duration, a whole bunch of temporary HP, and a +3 status bonus to saving throws. Enemies have a -3 status penalty to will saving throws. So again, this is a massive debuff meant for you to take on a whole bunch of enemies all at once. And honestly, think about it. Imagine the previous spell, Veil of Broken Reality, working with Under Sunless Skies. One caster in the party uses Veil of Broken Reality. Everyone who crit succeeds converges on you. You then have another caster use Under Sunless Skies and just absolutely demolish everyone who came after the caster who used Veil of Broken Reality, and then take on the rest of your dungeon at your own leisure, because it's very easy to clear it out at this point, since everyone there is debuffed. And each time you fuel Under Sunless Skies, you cast a 9th rank command spell, targeting every single enemy in the area. So overriding the regular targeting restrictions of command, everyone in the area is commanded to do something devastating. This spell is incredibly powerful, and this is why I described impossible spells as being combat winning for the most part. Veil of Broken Reality is a different level entirely. It is meant to win an entire day against impossible odds. But this spell, which inflicts a debilitating status on enemies, making them blinded if they don't have greater dark vision, giving you a whole bunch of temp HP, giving you a huge boost to saving throws, and giving the enemies a huge penalty to will saving throws, and letting you one action command all of them every single round, targeting those will saving throws whenever you need to. Devastatingly good spell. And look at that beautiful art that came with the book. This is why I said the spell probably has the most aura, because imagine casting this on a battlefield and then just taking over the whole combat. And the lethologic mark for this spell effectively gives you light blindness, and you will not be able to heal it until you drink a potion created with the vial of black blood, created by the Groton hags of the Sightless Sea. Again, there are a lot of words in there that I don't know what they mean. That's what the spell does. An incredible spell that will instantly win the combat it's in. And to be clear, that's not just a property of the 9th rank one. There's a 7th rank impossible spell that also effectively instantly wins combats. And even the simple old damaging one we saw earlier, if you heighten it to whatever level you're at, it is going to do an excellent job of tilting the combat massively in your favor, if not just outright winning it. That is it for the showcase of the 3 impossible spells I wanted to talk about. There are 2 more in the book. But now I wanted to compare impossible spells and the thematic space they occupy to other similar thematic options that exist in Pathfinder. First up, something you've already guessed, because I mentioned it at the start of this video: rituals. Rituals generally cover the ground of creating long-lasting reality-shaping effects. Of the impossible spells, only one had a long-lasting effect, Veil of Broken Reality, and even that, its interestingness came from its lack of effect on reality, because whatever goes on for those 24 hours then gets forgotten, so nobody knows what happened. They might just see corpses and ruins and devastation in the battle that took place in the ensuing onslaught from the PCs and their allies in the area. Rituals, on the other hand, typically do create long-lasting effects, permanently improving plant growth, giving you a permanent or semi-permanent minion that follows you around and does tasks for you, giving you a sanctum, protecting you from scrying, and of course, the wish ritual itself. And even the rituals that don't cover permanent effects, most of them are still interesting for their narrative applications, like say Butterfly Bender or Inveigle. Effects that just directly buff your party for the sake of combat or adventuring day purposes, like say Guardian's Aegis or Fortifying Brew, are actually pretty rare as far as rituals go. And I do plan to make a detailed video on rituals sometime in the future, so I'm not going to get into all the details here. But in my opinion, rituals have always been a fun and interesting part of Pathfinder. They have always done what they were designed for. There has always also been a clash in expectations, though. But the truth is that rituals can be used to both impact the narrative on a level that impossible spells cannot touch, and also to create these self-contained effects like Guardian's Aegis and Fortifying Brew that flesh out your character and are useful on an everyday basis without permanently scarring your character or any kind of a lockout like impossible spells have. And then the second comparison I want to make is to Mythic spells. And this is a much more direct comparison because rituals just fill a different design space entirely. But Mythic spells ostensibly would fill the same design space as impossible ones, where the idea is that this is a spell so powerful it's not available to regular player characters. But the main difference is, Mythic spells were still designed with balance in mind. A Mythic PC should be able to take on Mythic enemies, and it should feel like roughly an even difficult match, and a Mythic PC should feel stronger than non-Mythic enemies, but not so much stronger that you stop using non-Mythic enemies altogether. And many folks did criticize Mythic's balance for not letting PCs feel appropriately epic. And while I do somewhat disagree with that criticism, because Mythic PCs are crazy powerful, I have played one before and I did feel distinctly more powerful than a regular PC of my level, it still does make sense where this criticism is coming from, because a lot of people interpret Mythic to mean that almost like level 21 plus of gameplay where you get to just do whatever, bend reality, reshape reality to your whims, and Mythic options, especially Mythic spells, often don't do that. Like an option like Diadem of Divine Radiance or Fate of the Locust Host, I think that's the name of that spell, They're powerful, definitely more powerful than equivalent rank spells, and worth both a spell slot and the mythic point you spend on them, but they don't instantly win the combat that you cast them on. They are ultimately spells that you use as part of a regular gameplay loop, and this directly addresses that concern. Impossible spells are designed from the ground up to be game-breaking. The first rank one, Pyroclastic Truth, is a game-breakingly good amount of damage at the rate it both starts and heightens, and the area it affects. And every single other spell is designed for the explicit purpose of breaking the game. Anytime you use one of these in combat, you will almost certainly win that combat. And I'm talking about combats that are intentionally imbalanced. Veil of Broken Reality especially prompts GMs to throw an imbalanced encounter at the players, expecting them to win anyways because of the sheer amount of value impossible spells can generate for them. And of course, mythic spells still have their own unique roles. There are mythic spells that cover out-of-combat utility in a way that impossible spells don't really do. And mythic spells, of course, don't have a lockout, so Diadem of Divine Radiance is a powerful spell above the curve that you can use every day, perhaps even in every combat of a given day. And this allows impossible spells to fill out their own unique niche. Spellcasters in Pathfinder are now reality warpers in multiple different ways. Spells themselves, as you grow in the ranks, bend reality more and more to your whim. Rituals allow you to have a very distinct narrative impact on reality. Mythic spells give you the ability to have demigod-like PCs for campaigns that are appropriate for them, and impossible spells cover the design space of game-breaking options, intentionally game-breaking options. Options that are designed for the GM to give the players and just destroy something with it. And note here that everything on the slide, rituals, mythic spells, and impossible spells are GM fiat. You can't access any of these unless a GM lets you, and these are just the different dimensions along which a GM can allow players to feel like reality warpers, and that is cool and fantastic and very appropriate for various campaign themes now. So let's address the aching question. When and how should I use impossible spell? Because this is an optimization channel, so that's the most common question people get when they see a new player-facing option. Well, this is not a player-facing option. Players don't get to ask the question of when and how I should use them. This is distinctly a GM-facing option, and there's a very helpful sidebar provided in the book for this. It talks about how to incorporate impossible spells in campaigns. They suggest that these spells should be integrated into the plot from the very beginning. These spells are not just meant to be a boosted fireball that you cast. These spells are not even meant to be something on the tier of Diadem of Divine Radiance and other powerful mythic spells. These are an entirely different thing. These spells should have history, rumors, legends behind them. Players should research them, both how to even find the components for it, what the spell will do, and how to get rid of the mark after if necessary. The sidebar suggests spending half a level or even all the way up to a whole level of questing just to find the components to cast this spell. That is the level of relevance they should have in your campaigns. And my advice to GMs would be that if you're gonna put an impossible spell in your campaign, be a little mean to your players. Use all of the options available to a GM to make combats disproportionately difficult for them, well past what the book suggests you do, so that they have a good reason to use these impossible spells. Don't just let them fight what would have been an extreme encounter and then trivialize it, because while that is fun, that can get boring fast, especially if you already have an optimized party. In my opinion, impossible spells should be paired with challenges worthy of those impossible spells. Let them trivialize something that would be unwinnable without the impossible spell, like I talked about with some of the examples for Under Sunless Skies or Veil of Broken Reality. And like I said, the book does have 5 impossible spells, and that is a small number. There are 3 that I mentioned, plus a spell called the Everfull Moon, which is sort of like a strictly better battle form spell in nearly every way, both its base rank version and the heightened version. Higher AC, higher temp HP, costs only 1 action instead of 2, and notably, it does not lock you out of casting spells or speaking. And then there's Call of the Quenching, a massive 1 mile burst that does area damage only to enemies, gives resistance to fire and concealment to you and all your allies, creates difficult terrain only for enemies, and each time you fuel it, you could summon animal with a rank 1 higher than Call of the Quenching, as long as that animal is aquatic or amphibious, and sustain multiple of them with just the one action. But that is just 5 impossible spells. Feel free to just brew more of them. Consider making a plot-relevant impossible spell that is almost in a semi-sentient way finding its ways to the player characters to give them a solution to a problem that they might be facing. Brew new impossible spells using both extremes, the 1st rank and the 10th rank one I mentioned, as a template for what they can do. As a GM, I would almost certainly incorporate the use of an impossible spell into a set piece. I would set up encounters I know the players cannot win, and then the impossible spell lets them. And this wouldn't be an easy encounter with the impossible spell. This would still potentially be challenging, just actually winnable for the players. The rest will fall down to their character sheets, not the fiat I gave them. And I want to mention an example from the 2nd season of the Castlevania TV show as a great example of how to set up impossible spells. If you don't want spoilers, please skip to the next chapter, which is just the outro. Ready for spoilers? The 2nd season of Castlevania, it's entirely built around the party, which is Trevor, Sypha, and Alucard, hunting for a way to beat Dracula, and notably hunting for a way to lock down his teleporting castle, because it kind of teleports wherever it needs to, and they can never safely assail it, because either they will find their way to it and it'll just go away, or they will find their way to it and he will move the castle to a place where he is being reinforced and they have no allies left. And a good chunk of the season is them just going into the Belmont Library and researching ways to lock down the castle while finding a lot of other things along the way. For example, Trevor does find a magic weapon for himself to use. And eventually they do find what would be like the cost component of the impossible spell, which is a scrying mirror that, between Alucard's own knowledge of Dracula's magic and Sypha's knowledge of all forms of magic, they're able to decipher a way to both scry on the castle and use that scrying as a way to lock the castle in place, and not just that, to actually forcibly teleport it to a pretty terrible place to be. So for the final episode of the season, Sypha teleports the castle from where it currently is to the party's current location, and then they assail it. And the entire time Sypha and Alucard are working on the spell, Trevor is responsible for protecting them from an onslaught of enemies who have realized that what she's about to cast is going to be a big problem. And this is a great example of how to incorporate an impossible spell into your campaign, while both, one, justifying its usage in a thematic sense and a narrative sense, because this was a dangerous gamble to attempt, but it was necessary to beat nearly impossible odds, and then present a challenging encounter after, because once they have teleported the castle and done something big with this impossible spell, they still have to beat Dracula in a fair fight. And obviously that won't be true of every impossible spell. For example, Veil of Broken Reality is not trying to give you a fair fight, but you still have to beat all those enemies who critically succeeded and know your location. These are the sorts of plots that you want to be setting up as a GM. And I will note here, despite Sypha being the one who cast the impossible spell in Castlevania, Alucard and Trevor both contributed the entire time through, helping with research, protecting her while she was casting the spell and being vulnerable, etc. And this is an important part of the campaign as well. Impossible spells should not end up feeling like the GM just giving a caster carte blanche to ruin an encounter's balance. It should feel like the party earned something broken and got rewarded for it. And you need to incorporate everyone into the process if you want this to be fun. And of course, fair warning, which I think should go without saying, but I will say it anyways, impossible spells used by NPCs against players is a horrible idea. It needs extensive telegraphing, and even with that, it's an incredibly dangerous proposition. If you just do it without telegraphing, it will feel horrible. So definitely don't use it against players unless you really know what you're doing. And that is all for today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the showcase on impossible magics, impossible spells. If you did, and if they got you excited to check out the book, please consider buying the book. I have left a link to Paizo's store in the video description below. And if you like this video, please consider liking and commenting. Every bit of engagement helps. If you want to see my future videos, including the spell deep dive I have planned and I'm deep in the process of cooking up, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the channel notifications button so you know right away when I post that video. And of course, if you'd like to directly support me, consider joining a channel membership. It is the most direct way of supporting me and ensures that I can keep releasing content. Regardless, I will see you next time. Mathfinder out.